While the media is focusing on Trump and his tariffs, the cost of living for every Canadian is going to keep going up, and it doesn't seem to matter if it's liberal or conservative in power. I'm surprised when I look at this election so far in Canada that both Carney and Poilievre, they're just not as concerned with the cost of living, the cost of goods and services for Canadians, and they're not as obsessed over that as everyday Canadians. And that gets me thinking about everything I've talked about on this channel, that government spending, regardless of who's in power, is going to keep going up. Hey everyone, my name is Christopher. I host the Open Mind podcast where I explore topics that others are afraid to talk about for fear of being canceled. So if you're liking my content, definitely hit that like button, subscribe folks, and my apologies for my last video where my microphone wasn't working, so I'm using my podcast microphone. Hopefully this is better today. So let's face it, Canada's spending has ballooned. Like when we look back just 10 years, our spending really grew after COVID, right? $567 billion. And sure, some will say, well, Christopher, it was a crisis. Of course we needed to spend. But the spending hasn't gone down since then. It's only gone up, meaning that we're spending tens of billions of dollars on the interest on the loans that we're taking as a country to pay for the government spending. Now, you might not think that these loans matter, but the more we spend on the interest on debt means that those are tax dollars you and I are spending, your kids are spending, your grandkids will be spending. And if history's anything of a lesson, government spending's not going to go down. Now, you might think that this is all because of Justin Trudeau during 2015 to 2024 and the Liberals and their addiction to spending money and that budgets will balance themselves. 100%. It has something to do with that for sure. But a lot of money has been spent on things that I would argue are very conservative-esque, like more tech on surveillance, more tech on immigration processing and other things like that. So there's a lot more on cybersecurity and tech spending than ever before. And that puts us in a bit of a quagmire because some people ask, well, what exactly does this mean? What are the implications from a civil rights perspective? Does this warrant a broader conversation with the general public? I think it does, to be honest, because there are concerns with cybersecurity. But the real thing that I think many Canadians may be thinking about is the explosion of temporary foreign workers. You know, I discussed this in previous videos. Temporary foreign workers are growing exponentially, and Budget 2024 allows even more temporary foreign workers. Now, we may all think that, temporary foreign workers are coming here, they're trying to build a life for them and their families, and it's going to be great. But we also have to remember, this is a very cheap, inexpensive form of labor that is exploitative. Temporary foreign workers do not get the same labor laws that you and I get as Canadian citizens. And companies are now over-relying on temporary foreign workers. It's almost like we've let the genie out of the box, or the genie out of the bottle. Sorry about that. Because it's not like companies are going to turn their backs to cheap, inexpensive labor when it's one of their largest, if not their largest, expense or cost in running business. And when you think about the politics of all of this, it just gets lost. You've got Poilievre talking about faster approvals for oil and gas pipelines and projects. You've got Mark Carney stoking the flames with Western alienation and Daniel Smith. You've got politicians, you've got all of them saying that they're going to fight Trump's tariffs as much as possible. Honestly, folks, this is my honest opinion. I just wonder how much of a distraction all of that is. Yes, of course, we should be fighting Trump's tariffs 100%. But your cost of living, my cost of living, it's going to continually rise. After COVID, it's not like the government's going to suddenly start cutting government spending. We haven't seen that 5 years after the pandemic was first announced. And I don't expect that to continue to go level off or go down. And this is the scary part, folks, because we've got the liberals and conservatives. Those are the only two horses when you really think about who's going to become prime minister and set the policies for the way forward. I think we as Canadians need to be asking more from our governments about the cost of living, because the way I see it, it's low-income families, it's the middle class that will suffer the most. Remember, the middle class, you're not poor enough to start getting some of the rebates from government specifically for low-income families, and you're not rich enough to not be impacted by inflation, high interest rates, low interest rates, etc. You are the middle class. You're getting squeezed from both ends. And I think we in the middle class need to be talking a lot more about cost of living. Because let me tell you something, if the cost of living keeps going up for groceries and essentials, how are people going to be able to afford things like a better life for themselves and their kids? How is Gen Z and Gen Alpha going to be able to ever afford a house? How are people today going to be able to afford it? I don't mean to make this all doom and gloom, but it's clear to me that government spending is going to keep going up, and with it, the cost of living will also continue to rise. And the death knell to this is our salaries aren't going to rise as government spending is. But what do you think? I mean, this is just my take, but I feel like it doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. No one's as concerned about the cost of living than Canadians. And you'd think that our politicians would be laser-like focused on this, but they seem to be much more focused on the noise out there, Trump's tariffs and whatever else. But they're not as concerned as you and I are on the day-to-day living as I thought they would be. Maybe I'm totally misreading this, but let me know what you think. Do you think conservatives and liberals are concerned about your cost of living? And do you think government spending will actually flatline and go down? Let me know what you think in the comment section below.